Samsanje Tam Jejingo, Rikdon Jungur Jamdu Chata, Pajan Zongame Barjino Pangurza, Lama Rinpoche, Namjeja Pirdra, Jamame Pada, Gora Dungudet, Kibishon Sarson Jatsun Cho, Shinji Laparim Tata, So, Rikdon Jamur Nation Lavir, Bokona Kopa Dejaver, Noto Chundu Jansong, Jiranza Tabanza, Yalan Surwan, Jimmy Sojin from your dear Lamon, Pendo Tabas, Yunnerzo. Hoy Pandim Johnny Rinpoche, Joe Pardan Laman Surwan, only general working is and goes, and our education lemon. Jimmy Pensos of Los Randi, Gondito Bambo, Chinjero, only general working is and goes, and our education lemon, Jimmy Pensos of Los Randi. Gondito Bambo, Chinjero, only general working is and goes, and our education lemon, Jimmy Pensos of Los Randi. Cultivating Buddha Shinjelo, Yundan Sanjay Gandon Yamnayon, Kajan Sanjay Gandhi Hobby, Sayu Lami Jabasunani, without so do you natural. Good afternoon, everyone. Tantani Inji Terp. Ini terang tergantung tambahsum karsen kini nisayati syatsam yomari dan marabantet disumurtu jegins.
The last time I gave a teaching, I spoke about the 3 sacred principles of practice, and so I'm going to continue that teaching.
Ini tambahsum dela tumbu azu jura senjip tambah jijitung yang mempunyai carsum tamdor di samsuk ini nipa. Last
time I already explained the first of the 3 sacred principles, which is the preparation to develop the proper motivation. And I explained a little bit about the second, which is to maintain non-conceptuality as the main practice. But I have a little more to say about that topic.
Teni amuji amumit tambah zejutu amumit tambah cani pacugona ini macam tegarang sosok rupa muncul pikan saya rumur congin terjadi segera.
And so to really do this main aspect of the practice properly, we must, and according to, like, the most authentic way to do it would be to sustain an introduction to our own awareness, our own nature of mind, to be sustaining that during the practice. The other way to really authentically maintain this second aspect of the main practice, to maintain non-conceptuality, would be to abide in the view of great emptiness. And so, to authentically abide in these, either the view of emptiness or the introduction to Rigpa, pure awareness that we have received, there are different divisions or classifications of that. When we say to authentically abide or to abide according to the true way or the definition itself, then there's different ways. What we are referring to is realization, and so there's 3. Sorry.
3 levels.
There's 3 levels. There's understanding, there's experience, and realization. And so, to really authentically abide, you would have to actually have a realization of one of those 2. And so of those 3 divisions, the first is understanding. And understanding comes from having heard a teaching or an explanation and contemplated it, and then thinking to yourself, oh, it must be like that. That's how we define understanding.
Tene tester goa ka tuni tene te nyam silong te nyongwa ji o parchen dim de sari samram be nyam nyong twal lewa ji yo ris te la nyongwa ji res.
And so then based on some understanding, if we've practiced, and in our practice we have some experience, then we can say to ourselves, oh, probably it's like this, the experience that I have. That is the second division of experience.
Tene nyongwa ka stana mentet de ringa nyam silen gom jap ten da chem thama to dan ta han do de hala jing do sam de dan ni par dan de san dan ji dan ji nga su de na ji sang je tong shen na to to ja shu na dan da han do sa yo sa ma ri sa ma go stop ba sa da ke zo me ba ran ga na yi che ba ten de stop yo le de la stop ba sa des.
Once we have some experience in meditation, then if we focus on that and if we maintain that, if we're able to sustain it as an experience that we always have in meditation, then that kind of meditation, then slowly we become really completely certain in that experience, and it really becomes our experience or our view. And so that's what is meant by tokpa, to realize, which is the third. And this is what the great accomplished masters do. This is it, the experience becomes their actual realization. And of course, that is the very best, number one. And if we don't have that kind of real realization, then what that means is we must practice. We must recite the practice as best we can, and we must meditate on generation stage, cultivating faith and pure view, and recite the practice, and in that way apply ourselves to these different stages of whatever practice we're doing. That's considered the middling. So the best way to sustain this second sacred principle of the practice is to have realization of one of those two profound views. The middling is to focus on the practice, cultivating faith and pure view, as was just described. And the lowest of these three options would be if you really are not able to sustain the view, if you're not able to practice with great focus on the stages of generation stage. But if you are able to, while you do the practice, cultivate faith, and also try to avoid the 5 poisons of desire, anger, ignorance, pride, and jealousy while you are practicing, this also constitutes the second sacred principle. So this would be the lowest or the least that we could do in practicing the second sacred principle. So at the very least, we must do that. And so when we are practicing, if we're not able to just simply avoid the 5 passions of pride, jealousy, desire, ignorance, and anger, then it's really no benefit to prostrate or to do any kind of practice if our minds are just full of the 5 poisons.
Chinese no so kali jambo
And so the reason this is so important is we can understand from the teaching on the 3 faults of a pot or vessel. And one of those 3 faults is to have a vessel with poison in it. And so when we speak of that in relation to our meditation practice, that means to have a mind that is filled with these 5 passions. And so just like if you have a vessel with poison in it, whatever delicious food you pour into it just becomes poison. In the same way, when our mind is filled with any one of these 5, whatever practice we try to do, it's of no benefit and it just becomes poison.
Tena indede ngaso chopa nyamne jena rung semna ta turna ni partana te me pachu zol goris te thona ga ta pan sang te jambang la ya te so de chadu chung de goris.
And so whenever we practice, obviously it is the very most important thing that we eliminate these 5 passions from our mind and cultivate faith and devotion.
Tina tanga so gewa kang tam kang jumna ngaso linga karkewa zejita sem karkewa zjani yoris.
When we speak of virtue, there's a virtue of body and speech, and there's virtue of mind, these 2 divisions.
Tena ngaso linga karkewa tang sem karkewa no na karkewa chishu de sem karkewa yoris.
Between those 2, the virtue of mind is the greater virtue.
Jamji danjorum bochi ko songda Tamba tsugna sim rung sim la tsug sim ji namna songje ni mo ozi de tamba tsugna rung sim ga nam tsug de ze sim ga nam tsugna ta songje ze ji shilo na ma so nya yo ma rung sim ga tong ni songje de ni ko de so dus tamba songje ga tamba tsugna sim ga nam rung sim la tsug res
We have to stop.
oh yes
His Holiness Rinpoche said, if we are looking to establish the teachings, where do we establish them? We must establish them in our own mind, not anywhere else.
Then the sim kanona sanje ni was sim kanona sanje ni tukres. Shivone sanje la ya tsaya na so rakchi maris sim kanona rakchi.
Where can we find the Buddha? We find him within our own mind. You are not going to find the Buddha externally anywhere else, but in your own mind.
Tena indi damasu sanje gu tamba lamnanda, then tanzu gu chibu lamnanda, samada nanga yonda la gyores. Tengah sanje gu tamba lamnayonda, then tanzu gu chibu lamnayonda, then nanga yonda la gyore mako shilula la gyore.
So whenever we speak of the Buddha's teachings, or we speak of those who hold the Buddha's teachings, these are all considered to be inner qualities, not our own inner qualities, our own inner qualities, and not something external.
Tena sanje gu tamba zamna danate, tanzu gu chibu lamna, tanzu gu chibu lamna, karas kandas la gyore zena, ona rungur dibla, tupi shirap, tupa ga yondan yopa. Sampi shirap, sampi yondan yopa, gompi shirap, gompi yondan yopa. Then it's only good don't stop. Then the shanty could sim get a unit if dancing is still that. They motto Zamba, Tamon Kazi Chena, then top Kazim Tona, and the dancing is still up on the Maris. Dancing is still, then does not dancing is still Zendri. Then does units only, come calling a kill in Iona, Malina and Dako, dancing is still choice.
When we speak of the Buddha's teaching, or those who are holding the Buddha's teaching, what does that really mean? When we speak of holding the teachings, what it means is holding them in our own minds. In our own minds, we cultivate the prajna, or wisdom of hearing, the qualities that come from hearing. We cultivate the prajna, or qualities that come from contemplation, and we cultivate the prajna and the qualities that come from meditation. We cultivate realization of the view of emptiness, and we cultivate bodhicitta. And so when all of these are arising in our minds, that is, then one is the individuals who hold the doctrine, a doctrine holder. So a doctrine holder is not defined by having a high name or high status or being famous or anything like that. A doctrine holder is determined by holding these qualities, these Dharma qualities in one's own mind.
어딘가 그래서 인디 나름 소이나 쓰던 쓰이나 단지 지금 참지가 국급 요기 오늘이지 알아서 그 연된들 정말.
And so it doesn't matter who you are, everyone could become a holder of the teachings, because anyone can cultivate these qualities in your mind.
지금데 연된데서 연는데 단지 지금 참 오늘이지 단지 지금 참은 다 랑선 거는 샘진 것도 잘 오늘이지.
If you have these qualities in your mind, then you are a holder of the doctrine. And if you are a holder of the doctrine, that means you naturally benefit all beings.
가르지나탄 질랍 상처가 샘 요님 zon대다 랑돈 그다음에 정도도 파스트 동그래 잔돈 포나도야야 그래서 이거 샘진 것도 랑선 것도 그용했어.
And the reason is because if you truly have bodhicitta in your mind, then you've completely given up self-interest or self-concern, and you only think about, your only focus is the benefit of others.
어딘가 그래서 이니 나서라서나 영웅 받는 거용 차버드는 다 적동세지나 할 리바가는 그 보지요리스 내가 정용품, zan용품 내가 지금 그래서 적동도 좀 리바드는 라면서 그 잡습진이 지금 총산이거든 잡습진이 몇번 어떻게 거리스.
And so because of this, we can see that the passion of jealousy is especially negative, because it really brings ourselves down and it brings others down. It's a negative wish for both oneself and others, or against oneself and others equally. And so jealousy is really the worst of all the negative emotions that we could find in our mind, and we need to recognize it in our own minds and be very careful to abandon it.
아니 적동한 연보도 가리지나 일지스 이런 말이지. Ini langsung jangkar kewan sena yang dah, jang yarjilam rogo yang dah, jang kena janton doktor yang dah kela, ini rengga kajang nyime kena oh cina, wadah samdan erjis iram jetuna, nanti kewan tu sambil macam baris.
And what is the antidote to jealousy? It is rejoicing. And so we should rejoice in what others have. We should wish for them to always gain more of whatever it is they're enjoying. We should cultivate great happiness and joy from the bottoms of our hearts in the successes or the benefit of others, always.
Karma chome ko songdaga, zanjir gewa shepa tu putse, tela propomur gesem pone, nyongir gabi jisi iram na te yusum nyamta tu persong. 어장그 개만 시바티나 그 propon 때도 함정이 그 심도스톤 가장 님의 그 시다고 담는 사람을 지세는 저는 개만도 하나마다 톱송이라.
Karma Chakma himself explains that if we rejoice from the bottom of our hearts in others' virtue, then that virtue, that much virtue will also be visited upon ourselves. And so just by rejoicing, we can receive the virtue of others.
대나마도 생걸 개만지지 똑친 거리지 같은 아주 대소만은 링업 거기와다 더 심나 양아지는 링업 거기와 지금 동카지 고라진 이거 질라 덥지라와 맞아 카지 님의 그 상처 그 심도 까마치가 보나 이파양의 제제다는 소요리도 강사 손도 말이 라마 강원스가 손도 말이 선진근의 추나 까나 되나 소요리스 되나 생걸 개만지지 되나 똑친 거리지.
And so they say that the Buddha himself says that the virtue of the mind is very, very strong and very important, because with our body and speech we can engage in many, many virtuous activities, but without accompanying it with virtue of the mind, it will not be very powerful. But compared to that, just one moment or one instant of having bodhicitta, the true compassionate wish to benefit all, even just a small action will, with this mindset, will produce very vast benefits. And so the Buddha himself explained that this was the case.
대면나 만타양 삼바성 보지 샘진 쓰던 쓰는데 옆에서 용벌 접진 산 아데 뒤통에다 상치가 심도 현재 검토다 언던 보야 마에는 삼바성 보장은 파연 배치 보레스.
It's so important to have a good heart and to wish others well, to think, oh, whatever beings there are, may everything go well for them. So cultivating loving kindness and compassion and bodhicitta in that way, really having a good heart and a benevolent intention is very important.
근데 삼바성 보통 상치가 샘범나 그러면 비슷한 거 찾아야지. 나가서 아무 속에 야라 넘나다는 다 삼바 정보지 단 직딩 감단의 심진 수동 세이나 드더스 메버 지지 삼 수동 세이나 심진 탐지 되어 단담을 지지 삼는 데나 삼는 돈을 감막지니 그때 되는 데지는 단 파연치 않아 루인단 그런 게 셈 디님 받는 셈소 기보 초콜릿.
And also, there's a great benefit to ourselves of cultivating a good heart and bodhicitta. For example, if you get up early in the morning and you just sit for maybe 10 minutes thinking to yourself, oh, may all beings, may everyone, whoever there is in the world, may they all be free of suffering. May everybody have happiness. May all beings have these things. Even just thinking those positive thoughts for 10 minutes makes our own minds very happy. And so you could say the greatest benefit is really visited upon ourselves when we do this meditation. And so that also is the how we can engage in the actual practices by cultivating that kind of mindset. And so that is my explanation for today on the second sacred principle. So the third sacred principle is to conclude the practice by dedicating the merit, and this is extremely important. And so a great example of why dedicating the merit is so important is, for example, if we work very hard in the world and we earn a lot of money, but we don't put it in the bank, we just keep it someplace, then thieves can come and steal it. And so in the same way, if we make a lot of virtue, but we don't dedicate it, then we will easily lose it. And so who steals our money? Well, it's the thieves. Who steals our virtue? Well, it's our own passions and negative emotions. And so the principal thief of our virtue is always anger. In the way of the Bodhisattva, it explains this. It says that one instant of anger can burn up our virtue of the 3 times. Just like lighting a small fire in dry grass, it will quickly consume and overcome. And so if we work very, very hard to accumulate a lot of merit, we must dedicate it, because otherwise it will just easily be lost. We are ordinary beings. It's easy for us to become angry or upset. And when that happens, then our virtue is so easily destroyed. So that is the first reason why dedication is so important. The second reason is that there are 4 causes which exhaust virtue.
tell all the peoples,
Oh,
oh, I did this, did that, did that. I'm giving example. Then the job practice, they don't give us their job practice, and you give us example. You give us such a good juice in the Chinese.
So the four causes which exhaust a virtue are as follows. The first is to not dedicate the virtue to begin with. Second is to dedicate it incorrectly. For example, dedicating it and saying, in the future, may I become a murderer?
Something like that.
Something very negative, dedicating the virtue to a very negative purpose.
Yes.
The third would be to brag about our virtue, say, oh, I did this and this and that, isn't it wonderful? And the fourth would be to have remorse or regret for what we did. And so any of those four will exhaust our virtue. And so for that reason, it's extremely important that we always dedicate our virtue. And so now the question will be, well, how do you dedicate virtue correctly? To correctly dedicate virtue, you should use the view of the non-conceptuality of the three spheres. Can somebody get me a pen, please? And so the three spheres would be the one who is you, the one who is dedicating the virtue itself, and the sentient beings who are receiving it. So there's these three sort of elements. So realizing that there is no conceptuality or reality to the one who is dedicating, to the merit itself, and to the sentient beings receiving that. And so each of those three aspects we have to think, they appear, but they have no true existence. Their nature is great emptiness, and they are illusory or magical in how they appear. But if we don't, however, if we don't have a really good realization of the view of non-conceptuality, then it's very difficult to practice dedication correctly in this way. But we can dedicate, perhaps not with that view, but in accord with that view. For example, when we do our dedication prayers, if we recite the prayer for excellent conduct, then this makes it into a perfect and wonderful dedication. Because within the prayer for excellent conduct, there are the four lines that say Jampa Pao Jitar Kemba Dang, etc. Just as the noble monk Jushri and Kundu Zampo have done, so too do I dedicate this merit. And so when we say these prayers, then we are aligning ourselves with the view and the motivation of the Bodhisattvas Manjushri and Kuduzongpo. And we are saying, just in the same way they dedicated their merit, so too do I. Or just in the same way that the Buddhas of the 3 times dedicated in the merit, so too do I. And so we are relying on their view and their way of dedicating in order to dedicate our own merit.
Akare generation jumping young on the Kundu song for the Solid and Pumawaki, Horson by my Shipsaya. And in the Kuros of Garage and
And so we are relying on their view of non-conceptuality. We are saying, in the same way Manjushri and Kunduzangpo, in the same way all the Buddhas dedicated their merit, they had the correct view. They could see the non-conceptual nature of the 3 spheres. I dedicate my view like them. And so relying on their view, we're able to dedicate our own merit in the same way. If we dedicate in this way, then we can be sure that our merit will never be exhausted until we achieve the state of fully awakened Buddhahood. And so many times you'll hear these terms, dedication and then aspiration. You'll kind of hear those 2 different terms or 2 different aspects. For example, the prayer for excellent conduct is considered to be an aspiration prayer. In the Tibetan title it says Munlam, or aspiration. But actually those 2 different aspects are very similar.
As a good Tenetina Mujitela, Moazigulis, in Andombati, as a monum of Supanoris, Monum Layati, Ergeva Monson, Nepal, Kargoni, Monum Tanatina, Monum Lapuri. Moazigit, Ergeva Mon the Soni, Tilan, Monum Danatila, Monacuris, Chapatinaris.
So the difference between dedication and aspiration is dedication is used when you've just specifically accumulated some virtue, and then you dedicate that to other beings, to all beings. Whereas aspiration is more general. It can generally be dedicating virtue that you didn't just immediately accomplish. It's just generally dedicating all virtue and making prayers based on that. And so that's the difference between the 2, is dedication is about dedicating the specific virtue that you might have just accomplished, whereas aspiration is a more general dedication of all virtue. And so that concludes my explanation of these 3 sacred aspects. And you can see how important the dedication is, and you can see how important actually all 3 of these aspects are. And so whenever you do any kind of practice or virtuous activity, it's so important to remember these 3. And so still we have about 10 days of practice where we will be sitting in front of the kudung, in the presence of the kudung, and here we can accumulate merit and we can purify obscurations. And so during this time, you can see that it's really extremely important to bring these 3 sacred principles into our practice. It's extremely important and extremely meaningful, and they should not be neglected. And my hope is that this advice can be a benefit to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.